She was 17, full of life, and then gone. What seemed like a quiet Halloween night in Utah would become a chilling chapter in the legacy of America's most notorious serial killer. This is the forgotten story of Laura Aime.
Laura Aime was just 17 years old when her life was tragically cut short. A high school student in Utah, she had dreams, friends, and a future ahead of her. She lived in Leahy, a quiet town nestled in the mountains, the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors and everyone knew each other. Laura wasn't just another teenager, she stood out. She was kind, artistic, and loved poetry. Her friends described her as warm and free-spirited. On Halloween night in 1974, Laura attended a party in Orem. It was supposed to be a night of fun and celebration. No one could have predicted it would be her last. She left the party alone. It was late, cold, and dark. But in a town like that, walking home didn't seem dangerous. Not back then, when she didn't return home. Her family immediately grew concerned. It wasn't like her to stay out all night without letting someone know. The next day, they contacted the police. A missing persons report was filed, but as in so many cases at the time, urgency wasn't the priority. In the early days of her disappearance, friends and neighbors came together. Flyers were posted. Searches were conducted, but no one had answers. The community hoped she'd just run away, maybe to escape teenage drama, maybe to visit a friend. They clung to optimism, even when it hurt. Weeks passed, then months, and still no trace of Laura. Her absence became a haunting silence in her family's life. Her bedroom remained untouched, her journals still on the nightstand, her favorite records unplayed, everything frozen in time. Meanwhile, the fear began to creep in. What if she hadn't left by choice? What if something terrible had happened? As the investigation dragged on, the case grew colder. There were no witnesses, no signs of struggle. Just a young girl who vanished into the night. Behind the scenes, police across the country were beginning to piece together a much darker puzzle, one involving multiple states and countless victims. But Laura's name hadn't yet been connected to it. Not yet. Her friends would later describe the eerie feeling that someone had been watching them, that their innocence was slipping away with each passing day. Leahy was no longer a town untouched by evil. Laura's disappearance changed that. It left a scar, one that still lingers decades later. People began locking their doors. Parents no longer let their children walk home alone. The illusion of safety had been shattered. Laura Aime had become a memory. But no one could have imagined that her name would one day be linked to one of the most notorious serial killers in American history.
While Laura's family held on to fading hope, another name was slowly spreading across state lines, a name that would become synonymous with terror.ted. Bundy had already begun his trail of horror, abducting and murdering young women with a chilling pattern of charm, manipulation, and violence. In 1974, Utah was still unaware of the storm that was brewing. Bundy, a law student and political volunteer, didn't fit the mold of a monster. He blended in. He smiled. He held doors open and offered help with a limp or a fake cast. No one suspected the predator behind the mask. Police in Washington, Oregon, and Utah were beginning to notice something disturbing: young women disappearing under similar circumstances. Bundy was methodical. He targeted girls who looked alike: dark hair, parted in the middle, often students, often kind. Girls like Laura. Authorities didn't link Laura to Bundy immediately. Her body hadn't been found. Her case still sat in a drawer labeled missing. It wasn't until months later, when a group of teenagers exploring near American Fork Canyon stumbled upon human remains, that the truth began to emerge. It was a chilling discovery. The body was badly decomposed, left in the woods like an afterthought. But there was enough left to identify her. Dental records confirmed what no one wanted to believe. Laura Aime had been murdered. Her death wasn't peaceful. It was brutal. The medical examiner determined she had been beaten and sexually assaulted. The violence was personal, rage-filled, and all too familiar. Still, the connection to Bundy wasn't official. Not yet, but the method matched, the timeline matched, and so did the terrifying signature. By then, Bundy had already been arrested in Utah for attempted kidnapping, but no one yet knew the true extent of his crimes. As investigators dug deeper, they found a horrifying pattern. Bundy had traveled through the very area Laura disappeared from, on the very night she vanished. Witness accounts placed a man matching his description near the party Laura attended. He had been seen lingering, watching. Bundy later confessed to Laura's murder in chilling detail. Her death, like so many others, had been just one stop on his path of destruction. He described how he approached her, how she trusted him, how he took her life with calculated cruelty. His words were devoid of remorse. For the people of Utah, the revelation was devastating. This wasn't just a random act of violence. It was part of a nationwide killing spree. Laura's case became part of the official record, one of many names on a long, grim list. But for her family, it was the name that mattered most. Bundy was eventually convicted. But no sentence, no confession could ever bring Laura back. Her story had become part of a much larger nightmare.
The discovery of Laura Aime's body changed everything. It confirmed the community's worst fears and pulled them into a national horror story. Her remains were found in a remote area, near the Little Dell Reservoir, a place both beautiful and haunting, forever marked by violence. Investigators processed the scene carefully, but months of exposure to the elements had erased most of the physical evidence. Still, what remained told a heartbreaking story. Laura had been lured, assaulted, and left alone in the wilderness, discarded like a secret. Her family now had answers, but no peace. Knowing how she died only deepened the grief. The pain of imagining her final moments was unbearable. As the Bundy investigation unfolded, more and more victims came to light. Laura's name was spoken alongside dozens of others, Bundy's. Trials drew national attention. He was charming in court, manipulating the media as skillfully as he had manipulated his victims. But beneath the surface, he was unraveling. The mask of normalcy cracked as his cruelty came to light. In 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in Florida's electric chair. Crowds cheered outside the prison. For many, it was justice. For others, just an ending. For Laura's loved ones, it was neither. Justice felt hollow when the person they lost could never return. Her death became a symbol in Utah of innocence lost, of evil hiding in plain sight, and of the need to protect those who walk alone. At Leahy High School, Laura's memory lingered in the hallways. Teachers remembered her. Friends visited her grave. Her presence never truly left. Years passed, but the story didn't fade. People still visit the place where her body was found. Some bring flowers. Others just stand in silence. The path to the reservoir has become a kind of pilgrimage, a place where true crime and tragedy intersect with memory and mourning. Online, her name lives on, tributes from strangers, documentaries, websites like Oddstops, all seeking to ensure she's never forgotten. Her case is often used to educate about the dangers of trusting appearances, about how monsters don't always look like monsters. Parents tell their kids about Laura. Her story is a warning wrapped in sorrow, a reminder to be careful, but also to care. What happened to Laura was senseless, but remembering her gives her story meaning. She wasn't just a victim, she was someone who mattered deeply. In telling her story, we honor not only her life, but the lives of every girl silenced by violence, every voice stolen too soon, and so, Laura Aime's name endures not as a footnote in Bundy's legacy, but as a young woman whose light was stolen and whose memory still burns bright.
Okay, so welcome. We're doing a deep dive today into some information you shared, focusing on a really, quite tragic story.
That's right. It's about Laura Aime, a 17-year-old from Lehi, Utah, back in 1974.
And her disappearance, which, as we now know, connects directly and chillingly to Ted Bundy.
Yeah, the source we have, this pasted text, really paints a picture of the events and, well, the ripple effects.
It really does. And it starts by setting the scene, doesn't it? Lehi in 74.
Mm-hmm. A place described as, really close-knit, trusting. People apparently didn't even lock their doors back then.
It sounds almost like a different world, that level of trust.
It really does. And that's the backdrop against which this whole thing unfolds, which makes it even more, I think, shocking.
Absolutely. And Laura herself, she's portrayed as this bright kid, right? 17, artistic, loved poetry.
Yeah, warm, full of potential, just a typical teenager in many ways, looking forward to her future.
And then comes Halloween night. She goes to a party in Orem nearby.
And just doesn't come home.
Yeah.
Vanishes.
That initial period must have been pure confusion and, well, hope, right? The text mentions the first thought was, maybe she ran away.
Exactly. That was the hope. You see the community immediately rallying, searching, putting up flyers. That default assumption, maybe it's not the worst case scenario.
It speaks volumes about the place, doesn't it? That the unthinkable wasn't the first thought.
Definitely. But as days turn into weeks, then months, no word, nothing.
That hope must have started to fade pretty quickly, replaced by, well, fear.
A real gnawing fear. And the detail about her bedroom left exactly as it was.
Yeah, journals open, records out. It wasn't planned. She expected to come back.
Totally. It just screams sudden interruption, something violent happened.
And you can feel that shift in the town's atmosphere described in the source.
Oh, absolutely. That illusion of safety. Gone. Shattered.
People start locking their doors, looking over their shoulders.
Yeah, that sense of community trust fundamentally broken. Her disappearance became this scar, as the text says.
A permanent mark on Lehi's collective memory, really.
And it makes you wonder, how does a town even begin to process that kind of breach?
Especially when, unknown to them at the time, the person responsible might have been right there.
Right. Because Ted Bundy was in Utah in 1974, but he wasn't, lurking in the shadows in the way you might picture.
No, he was a law student involved in politics, volunteering. He seemed respectable.
Blending in perfectly. That's the terrifying part, isn't it? His ability to seem so normal, charming even.
He didn't fit the monster stereotype at all.
Not remotely, which is how he operated, how he gained trust. It really challenges our assumptions about what evil looks like.
While Lehi was dealing with Laura's disappearance as this local tragedy, a pattern was starting to emerge elsewhere, wasn't it?
Yes, slowly. Police in Washington, Oregon, Utah, they started comparing notes, disappearances of young women.
And the similarities were uncanny. The text points this out clearly.
Yeah, the physical descriptions. Often dark hair, parted in the middle. Often students seen as kind, approachable.
Just like Laura.
Exactly like Laura. It's just a chillingly specific type he was targeting.
But connecting those dots across different states, different police forces, that takes time.
Oh, absolutely. For a while, Laura's case was just filed under missing person in Utah. An isolated incident, seemingly?
Until that awful discovery months later. Teenagers finding remains in American Fort Canyon.
Yeah, the source uses that phrase, left in the woods like an afterthought. Just brutal.
And then the confirmation. Dental records. It was Laura.
Imagine that news hitting the community, their worst fears confirmed in the most horrific way.
And the details from the medical examiner. Signs of a beating sexual assault.
It points to extreme violence, rage, just sickening.
Even then, the link to Bundy wasn't immediate, was it? But investigators must have started seeing the parallels.
Right. By then, Bundy had actually been arrested in Utah for something else, attempted kidnapping. but the scale of his crimes wasn't known yet.
So they start looking back. His timeline, where he was.
His presence near Orem around Halloween 1974 witnessed accounts of someone looking like him near the party Laura attended.
The pieces start falling into place.
And eventually, much later, comes the confession.
Chillingly detailed, apparently. No remorse. Just recounting how he approached her, likely gained her trust.
And then killed her. Coldly. Calculated. It's hard to fathom that level of darkness hidden behind a normal facade.
For Utah, this must have been a moment of terrible realization. This wasn't just their tragedy anymore.
No, it was part of something much bigger, much more terrifying. A national horror story unfolding.
Laura became one name among many linked to Bundy.
And that realization that this monster had walked among them targeted one of their own. Devastating.
The discovery of her body brought some answers, but also intensified the grief, didn't it? Knowing the violence she suffered.
Definitely. And the location itself, near Little Dell Reservoir, apparently quite remote, isolated, a haunting place.
Plus, the time lapse meant evidence was probably lost.
Yeah, the elements, decomposition, making the investigation harder, adding frustration on top of the grief for the family, knowing what happened, but maybe not every detail. Agonizing.
Then came the trials, the media circus surrounding Bundy.
Right, and his manipulation, his attempts to play the system, the whole country was watching.
Culminating in his execution in Florida in 1989.
And the source mentions the mixed feelings about that. Justice, closure.
For the families, like Laura's, can there ever really be closure? Justice feels like such a small word for such a huge loss.
It often does. Hollow, perhaps. It doesn't bring her back.
What's striking, though, is how Laura's memory has endured, especially in Utah.
Very much so. She's become this symbol, hasn't she? Lost innocence, hidden dangers, the need to be vigilant.
The text mentions her memory being kept alive at her high school, people visiting her grave, online remembrance.
It shows the deep impact she and her loss had. She wasn't just a statistic in Bundy's tally. She was Laura Aime from Lehigh.
Her story really functions as a cautionary tale, even now.
Absolutely, about trusting appearances, about the fact that danger doesn't always advertise itself.
The idea that parents still use her story to talk to their kids about safety. That's powerful and sad that it's still necessary.
It is. It shows the story's lasting resonance.
So, wrapping this up, it's just an incredibly tragic story, isn't it? The impact on her family, her community. Immense.
Profound. But remembering her, focusing on her life and potential, like the source suggests, gives meaning beyond victimhood.
Yeah, she represents so many bright lives cut short by violence, potential extinguished.
Exactly. So Laura Aime's name endures, not just tied to Bundy, but as a reminder of her. A young woman with a future whose memory makes us reflect, makes us aware.
Of vital awareness, even today. You know those small towns, the kind you see in movies?
Yeah.
Where, like, everybody knows everybody. That safe feeling.
Yeah, that classic image.
Now imagine that feeling just shattering, completely gone.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we're going in this deep dive. Lehigh, Utah, 1974. A place that seemed peaceful, but it became the backdrop for something awful.
Absolutely. We're talking about the disappearance and ultimately the murder of 17-year-old Laura Aime.
A story that's just chilling.
It really is. And it forces you to look at how vulnerability can hide anywhere, even places that feel totally secure.
So, for this deep dive, we've got a few sources we're drawing on.
Right. We've got a wiki entry, for the basic facts. Then there's a website that really zeroes in on the crime scene locations, which is fascinating.
And a narrative account, too, right, to give us more of the human side.
Exactly. The context, the feeling of the time, different angles on the same event.
Okay. So, our goal here really is to understand what happened. Not to, get lost in speculation, but stick to the facts.
Trace the events, understand the atmosphere then, and how this local tragedy eventually connected to Ted Bundy.
Right. Let's start with Laura herself. Who was Laura Aime?
Okay, so Laura Ann Aime, she was born August 21st, 1957, lived in Lehigh, just 17.
Still in high school.
Yeah, high school student. And the narrative source we have describes her as, kind, artistic. Apparently she loved poetry.
That gives you a little glimpse, doesn't it?
It does. And it also mentions she was staying with friends around that time, not at her family home right then.
And Lehigh itself, The narrative really emphasizes this small town feel,
Totally. Like, people didn't lock their doors, that kind of thing.
which just makes the contrast even starker, doesn't it? The shock must have been immense.
Oh, absolutely. It's key to understanding how the community reacted later, that feeling of, this can't happen here.
Okay, so let's get into the timeline. The night she disappeared. Halloween, October 31st, 1974.
Right. She was at a Halloween party. Now, there's a small difference in our sources here.
Yeah.
One suggests maybe a house party first in Orem, which is nearby. Another points straight to the Naughty Pine Cafe.
But the Naughty Pine Cafe in Lehigh itself,
Yeah.
that's confirmed as where she definitely was later.
Yes, exactly. That's confirmed. 130 West Main Street in Lehigh. The location site even has the coordinates, actually.
Wow, precise.
Yeah, 40.387934, Nash 111.851240. But the key thing is, she didn't stay long.
Okay.
She left shortly after midnight. So now it's technically November 1st, and she planned to hitchhike home.
Hitchhike. Wow. Different times, but still risky.
Very. And this is where it gets even more worrying. There's a reported sighting of her.
Where?
At Robinson Park in American Fork, also around midnight.
Wait, American Fork, how far is that from the cafe in Lehigh?
It's about 3.2 miles according to the location site.
Okay, so in that short time after leaving the cafe, she'd traveled over 3 miles.
Right. Which makes you think, how did she get there? Walking seems unlikely that fast, late at night.
So she probably got a ride.
Seems plausible. The park's coordinates are 40.376653, Nash 111.796394. But yeah, that sighting at Robinson Park is the last time anyone reportedly saw Laura alive.
And then nothing.
Yeah.
The mystery begins.
Exactly. Just vanished.
Until almost a month later. A really grim discovery.
Yeah, tragically. November 27th, 1974. Some hikers in American Fork Canyon, they found her body.
American Fork Canyon. That sounds remote.
It is. The location site puts the spot on Utah State Route 92, about half a mile east of the Timpanogos Cave Visitor Center. Coordinates again are 40.444871, Nash 111.698120.
And the details
Yeah.
were just awful.
Horrific. Both the wiki and the location site confirm. Her face was beaten beyond recognition. She'd been strangled with her own stockings.
Oh, God.
And there was evidence of rape and sodomy. Investigators at the time, they believe she'd probably died only about a week before she was found.
Meaning she might have been held captive for weeks. That was the terrifying implication, yes. Held somewhere after she was abducted.
And there was confusion at first about who it was. Yeah, really sad. They initially thought it might be another missing girl, Debbie Kent. There were several disappearances around that time, creating this climate of, fear.
So it took dental records.
It did. On November 28th, they confirmed it was Laura.
And she wasn't the only one missing.
No. The wiki entry points out she was the third of 5 teenage girls who disappeared in that area around then. Authorities initially thought, okay, these have to be connected.
You can just imagine the panic. Like, is there a monster out there grabbing girls?
Precisely. Just escalating fear. And it's into this atmosphere that eventually the name Ted Bundy emerges.
Right. He gets caught in 75, but for something else initially.
Yeah, and then, the escapes, the final capture in 78. It was a whole drawn-out thing.
But he did confess to Laura's murder.
He did. The wiki confirms it.
Yeah.
Confessed to her rape and murder.
And the details he gave, I read about those rituals. It's sickening.
Deeply disturbing. Washing her hair, applying makeup. Apparently he did similar things with another victim, Melissa Smith. It's just a chilling insight into his psychology.
So how did they definitively link him to Laura's case beyond the confession?
Well, the location website lays out some key evidence. First,
Wow.
the crime itself just fit his pattern. The victim profile, the MO, the method.
His signature?
Sort of, yeah. And crucially, tire tracks found near where Laura's body was dumped in one of those pullout areas.
And they matched his car.
Matched his Volkswagen Bug, yeah.
So the likely scenario is he picked her up somewhere, maybe near the park in American Fork or even back in Lehigh.
That's the horrifyingly plausible picture, yeah.
Right.
Abducts her, then drives her up to that isolated spot in American Fork Canyon. It's not a long drive, maybe 20 minutes, about 10 miles.
And the autopsy, did that align with his methods too?
It did. The site mentions skull and jawbone fractures, consistent with a sudden violent blow to the head. Bundy often used a crowbar, incapacitated his victims that way.
Just brutal efficiency. And didn't the narrative mention witnesses seeing someone like him?
Yes, near the party Laura had been at, someone matching his description. It all just lines up in this awful way.
You think about that town, Lehigh, that quiet place.
The impact was huge. That narrative source really drives this home, shattered that sense of safety.
People started locking doors.
Absolutely, locking doors, parents becoming hypervigilant. It fundamentally changed the town's psyche,
Yeah.
eroded that trust.
And Laura's case
Hmm.
wasn't just a local tragedy anymore. It became part of this huge, terrifying national story.
Exactly, a piece in the Ted Bundy puzzle.
And even though he was caught, convicted, executed, the narrative says it didn't bring peace to her family.
How could it? I mean, that kind of loss,
Yeah.
it's just a void. Legal resolution doesn't fill that.
But her memory is still alive there in Lehigh.
It seems so. The narrative suggests her story is still told, a reminder of vigilance, and that people still visit the site in the canyon as a way to remember.
It's important, isn't it, to remember her as a person?
Absolutely. As the narrative concludes, remembering Laura honors her life, not just as a footnote in his story, but as a young woman who mattered, a real person whose life was stolen.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, it's a stark story. Laura Aime. A vibrant young life cut short in the most brutal way.
Yeah, the chilling facts of her disappearance, her death, and that awful connection to Bundy.
And looking at cases like this, as hard as it is, it forces us to think about, well, the darker side of things, the impact of crime.
On individuals, on whole communities, it's profound.
So maybe the question to leave you with to think about is this. When something like this happens in a seemingly safe place like Lehigh, how does that change everything?
Right. What does it tell us about those vulnerabilities that might be hidden just beneath the surface, maybe anywhere? That sense of security. How fragile can it actually be?